actually, you've got an audience of people that's come for a talk. They're not punk, you know, they're going to jump in an Uber home and have their Waitrose dinner.
Welcome back, everybody, to Boys on Film, where we cast our eyes over the latest movies on offer. If you like the sound of that, please subscribe, and at the end of this video, give us the thumbs up if you've enjoyed it. Of course, that does hinge on whether you like this video and the review that we're giving you. I'm your host, Phil Marriott, and joining me is someone with the biggest safety pin through his nose. It's Sean Vickers.
And my emoji hand. In the past, I have had things pierced, Phil, but that is a different channel.
Different video completely.
Audience.
We might do that at some point, though, because I'm intrigued now.
we should. That's one for us to talk about in the pub first.
I know you love punk. You've played the Slits at King's Arms and on your Unflop podcast.
Done it all, babes. I mean, I might not look like it today. I might just look like, you know, some dad who's in the garden. But, you know, I think we're going to talk about that today. I loved elements of this, and we won't get into it too much now, but I love the idea of what punk is.
Do you think punk fans know what punk is?
Listen, this film, I'm sure, is like Marmite. It's going to really split the crowd.
We've talked about it a little bit. We were out at the weekend and we did kind of mention it in passing.
We were out at the weekend. I think I'm still recovering. We may never ever recover.
Everything was in passing that night. So it's about punk icon Vivienne Westwood and also her son Joe, the son of Vivienne's and Malcolm McLaren. And it's kind of about the start of the punk period. I mean, you can't really do an hour-and-a-half documentary and feature everything because there's so much of it. There's so many feelings. There's so much ambience. I mean, punk itself is a huge topic, isn't it, to cover?
It frames many topics. So, yes, it starts with something which is quite triggering to a lot of punk fans, and the idea of what Joe Corré wanted to do, which was to burn a bunch of memorabilia because it's just nothing. It has no value. And it's interesting how people perceive punk and what it means to them, this kind of like visceral reaction to like this action that he's doing. And then I think it challenges an idea, and that's what I liked about elements of this documentary, was it challenged an idea. And then I feel like there are people that are into punk or were into punk who become archivists in a way and want to store and kind of put something in a chocolate box, I would describe it, and how that plays. There's so many ways you can look at this documentary. I did enjoy it, but it is one for a bottle of wine or two and a discussion with people that really care about the topic.
Absolutely. I mean, that could be a never-ending discussion as well, because there are discussions featured in this documentary where it all goes pear-shaped. We'll talk about that later, because that was quite an interesting moment of the documentary for me. Anyway, it's called Wake Up Punk. I mean, how are you reading that title? Are you reading it as Wake Up Punk as in waking up the movement, or are you thinking of it as Wake Up Punk talking about a person?
I don't know, actually. Maybe it is waking up. Maybe in my mind it is waking up the movement. It's just interesting, isn't it? Because it frames from the beginning of this movement and how it got assigned this piece of language by the mainstream media. And for some people, even at that point, when it got given a label, it was dead. And you work through what, you know, I think Vivienne Westwood talks about it a little bit, like these kind of tropes around what punk is and what it became. What does it really stand for? What is it as a movement? And for Joe Corré, the clothing that his mother and his father created and a movement that he created, I think he's looking for the essence of that movement, and everything else is just redundant. That for him, I think, is his kind of like what he's trying to tackle with this idea. And as I say, there are other people with different views about, you know, basically destroying memorabilia or being an archivist for a movement that I think rally against it.
It is really interesting because there's a contrast, because a lot of people that weren't fans of punk, or not just the movement but the music as well and the fashion, would see it as being really ugly and aggressive and really negative. But actually punk was really positive because there was so much to do with that movement that inspired people and also set the start of something. Obviously it set the start of the new wave, new romantic movement. I think punk really did shake up a lot of things. I mean, politically it shook up a lot of things. You know, there were a lot of pissed off people.
There was something in the roots of punk, and hey, I'm no expert, and I'd say it's in the eye of the beholder, but the idea about it being anti-establishment and it being challenging in times that were very difficult in this country, and the idea that there are still people today that are anti-establishment on our driving an agenda and are trying to do things differently and are trying to move something forward. And that there's an essence of that isn't entirely punk, but there's an essence of the spirit of punk in that, which happens today, you know. And they reference WikiLeaks, and they reference like street graffiti artists, and they reference, you know, a lot of different movements that don't look like punk, but they are indeed have the essence of it. And I think that's a little bit where Joe Corré is coming from. And, you know, I think at one point there is a celebration where they're having like a high tea, and it's a punk high tea. Oh, and the commercialization of it is bullshit, you know. But then, you know, and this idea, I think there was, I can't remember where it was it the V&A or one of the big museums where they were doing this big kind of like, this is what it is. And like, it had become hyper commercialized, and it became a thing that was somehow supported, which was so far away from the core of what it stood for, which I can kind of get behind.
Because that's what a lot of this documentary is about that protest, because it was just after the 40th anniversary. I think it was 2016, wasn't it? So it's 76. Marking the 40th anniversary, a lot of the true punks were really anti that, because they were saying it was a movement. It's about people's expression. It's about people's behaviour and their feelings, you know, and obviously anti-establishment as well. And marking it in such a kind of cosmetic way almost was going against the grain about what it really stood for. But that was quite interesting, because there was a discussion with Vivienne and her sons, her two sons, and they were talking about how punk really comes across in the modern day scene as well, because of course Virgin, the credit card, that you know, they had the Sex Pistols on that marketing, and Brewdog, the beer company, that was obviously a punk ethic as well. There was one scene where Joe was actually framing the Brewdog logo, the label from the beer bottle. So I think they were finding that quite interesting, how punk is seen now.
The credit card really is anachronistic to me entirely, and that basically is a piece of marketing. I get the sense that Vivienne just looks on it bemused.
Yeah,
that's just a sense I get, you know. And I think there's some interesting parts where, you know, she created all of these looks with Malcolm, and she actually doesn't give a shit. She's a bit like, yeah, I made this thing, or I can't remember making it, or I did this, but she's so removed from it that people are like, oh, you must hold on to it, it's a movement. And she herself is like, do what you want, I actually don't care.
She was talking to camera, she was saying, oh yeah, I created the Anarchy logo. And even Joe questioned her about that and said, are you sure? Because that went way back. And I actually looked online today, and it looks like Crass, you know, the punk band Crass, they actually saw it in when they were travelling through France or something. So I don't think that Vivienne did actually create and design that logo.
But that's why I think that some of this is just being disremembered.
Yeah.
It's this point in time, like even some of the clothing, people are saying, that's not your clothing, you didn't design it. Or, you know, oh, here's Tipsy's here to have a view.
Tipsy's a massive punk fan. I'm sensing that by that hairstyle straight away. And the arsehole.
I mean, that's actually quite punk, her sticking her arsehole in this camera.
Kiss this.
Even her, she's going, I can't even remember if I made this or not. And Joe's going, it actually could probably be a fake that's been made because they just knock off the idea. And so much of it is like disremembered. And I think because she literally, today, it's a thing that happened. She was part of it. She generated elements of it. She was an auteur for parts, but also an observer and going along with it in other parts of it. And as I say, I think that partly drives Joe's decision, because Joe, you know, is the child of these two very famous people who believes he knows what it is. He believes more than anyone he knows what it is, because he has these two super brains that lived and breathed it and created elements of it. So he feels he's right. And then if your mother was going, I don't give a shit about any of that stuff, it's just stuff.
Yeah.
You know, punk wasn't about stuff. Then you get to where you get to with his decisioning to go, fuck off, I'm going to do whatever I want.
Isn't it funny though? Because he's obviously grown up with that, and he knows it more than anyone. He knows the family, you know, obviously Vivienne and Malcolm more than anyone, I guess. But it's funny because he was questioned by Jordan, punk icon, the late Jordan, who we lost just a few months ago. But I think they were sat in, it wasn't the BFI, I think it was somewhere like the Museum of London or somewhere. They were obviously marking the anniversary. And she said, and there's a lot of kind of playful banter back and forth between the audience and the panel, you know, the hosts of the panel there. There was an argument about who's the true punk, and he was like having a bit of a moan and a bit of a ramble on, and Jordan did actually say, hang on a minute, you were just like a small boy during the punk period. You wouldn't have known much really compared to us who lived through that when we're much older. And I found that quite funny.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a couple of things like that whole scene with Jordan I thought was brilliant. And
Yeah.
then there was Professor of Punk, which I think, again, the idea of being a Professor of Punk is also slightly jarring about the idea of it, that you've become this oracle of what it is. And I found that with the people that collected the memorabilia, because it's about being this kind of like fountain of knowledge around a topic and somehow being slightly removed from what it was all about. And that's what I sensed. But yeah, this is a movement that is, 40 years old, and people get sentimental about things and collect things and do things. That's human nature. And I think that was what I found interesting as the counterpoint to his decision to do whatever he wanted with it. And to be frank, I think she says to him, it's his stuff, he can do what he wants with it. And that's the truth.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some really interesting people in this. You mentioned Eddie Temple Tudor as well, who, of course, was in his own band. Temple Tudor, yeah, it was Temple Tudor, the band. But, of course, he starred in the movie, which was made, I think it was during the time that the Sex Pistols were about to split, and John Lydon was kind of featured in it, but then he wasn't happy with the script or something. There was a big court case because Johnny Rotten, of course, he's doing it now with Danny Boyle's Pistol TV series as well. Not happy about it. But yeah, he features in that movie, The Great Rock and Roll Swindle, which I think was released in 1980. So it was obviously just after the punk period. But yeah, I mean, there's so much to be angry about, I guess, with so many things that happened because everyone has different views.
Exactly. And also, what does it mean? Like, Vivienne's very interesting about John Lydon, about saying, initially he was it, and then he just became a caricature.
Yeah.
And he played into a trope. And so I find it all very interesting because all of these people, it's their bread and butter. It's what they're known for. So they're all going to have a slightly different view on it. And I find it. I don't know. I just think about other movements, and whether if you stick 40 years in the future, what it would be like. Like, you think about some of the big movements that have happened more recently. You think about something like Black Lives Matter. Man, if Black Lives Matter was suddenly hyper commercialized, or suddenly put in a museum, or suddenly, or people could start. I don't know. And it's just very interesting to see how this has been framed and how punk has played out. Because, yeah, I think it has become, hyper overground and massively commercial, but that's probably the victim of its own success.
So they had this big kind of protest, I suppose, in a way, of what he was doing back on the boat, which was echoing what happened outside the House of Commons with what they did originally during the punk scene. But yeah, they're on the boat and they've got the effigies of, the politicians, and he sets light to them, and it's kind of echoing what happened before. But there was a lot of hot air coming from Joe, because he was banging on about, people should be saving the planet. But we didn't really hear much evidence of that throughout the documentary. It was almost like, oh, is that what he's protesting about? Is that what he's angry about? The fact that, the planet is in dire straits. But it was only Vivienne's kind of, the part where Vivienne's hanging out the bus at the end during that moment where he's on the boat. And she's kind of doing more of the talking than he is about saving the planet. And I found that quite weird. It's almost like they were just wanting publicity and he just liked the sound of his own voice.
Yeah, there's a really tenuous, if any, connection, because he got so much press regarding the burning of this memorabilia.
And didn't he have an exhibition after using the ashes as well?
Yeah, that's right. There was so much press around it, like literally insane. All the news globally picked up on it, etc. And then in some ways, I think he took a stance to use that as a device with which to talk about global warming and climate change. And then there's the kind of two topics at play here that he uses one to try and drive the origin story of the other, and that's respectful, because he's trying to say, I'm going to try and drive awareness around what I think the big issue is.
Which I completely applaud, by the way. It's just, I applaud.
So he's
there wasn't much of it, though.
Me burning a bunch of T-shirts isn't the issue. This is the issue, right? Yeah. I think that's the connectivity of it. And I don't think the documentary really does justice to the second half of that conversation where, Vivienne and himself are trying to articulate this climate change issue, but using the burning of this memorabilia as a device to do so.
It's almost like it's detracting away from the real issue, but I don't know whether it worked. I think it just got them publicity, but maybe for the wrong reasons. I don't know whether people were talking about climate change afterwards.
I think that's fair. You know, they could say I drove awareness. I mean, you don't know what the outcome they were after. Do we just want to drive awareness? You know, I think it's honourable, the connection, the impact. I don't. To your point, Phil, I don't know the answer to that.
Because I suppose if you were banging on about climate change, a lot of people would be like, "Oh, I've seen people do this before, and it's not really anything new." And I'm a bit irritated by somebody banging on about climate change when I know it's already there. I know, you know, the planet is suffering, but I suppose they did it in a unique way that was true to them.
And look, I'm just going to put this out there. Vivienne Westwood works in the fashion world. And the fashion world is notoriously bad for climate change. So, and I know I've seen her documentary where she's been angered about her own company because she's now almost at arm's length from this machine that is the Vivienne Westwood brand. You know, so there's a little bit of, I don't know, it could be seen as hypocritical to be like on a bus going, you know, the world's going to be on fire and you want to run a massive fashion brand that just basically eats resources. So, do you know what I mean? So there's, I don't know whether that's placating her actions, that she's saying, you know, we're a fashion brand and actually I'm doing this to demonstrate that that's what I want to change things as well. I don't know the answer. That is just complete subjectivity and I'm just kind of like spitballing. But do you know what I mean? Like, it felt like two different things. As I say, I think the intent was honourable, but I think the execution of that was slightly off. I did find it very interesting that Daniel Lismore, who was in the audience, said the true, as I mentioned, the true punk today's WikiLeaks.
I love that.
And I thought, I was like, that's an interesting dialogue to talk about. That's something really interesting. But in some way, Daniel Lismore is right. Even though you're sat in a room with Jordan and Joe Corré and all of those people, professor of punk, actually, you've got an audience of people that's come for a talk. They're not punk, you know, they're going to jump in an Uber home and have their Waitrose dinner. Like, do you know what I mean? They're not punk. Actually, he's right. Even the people on stage are not punk because it's a feeling, it's a behaviour, it's a movement, it's anti-establishment. None of those people are any of those things.
Being individual, but also being part of a clan, being part of a tribe.
Well, there is that as well. There is all of those elements. And I say it's multifaceted. Someone could watch this and go, Phil and Sean are talking complete garbage. Like, what do they know? And they'd be right. You know,
and
we are taking an assessment of how we see it, right? We watch this documentary and I'm like, I thought it generated a load of interesting thoughts in my head. And I love the music that came out of punk. But absolutely. I can't claim to be a punk.
No. I'm the same because I didn't necessarily go out and buy every punk album, buy every punk artist. I love a lot of punk artists. I love a lot of people that were inspired by punk as well. And that's another thing. It's got this history of, you know, inspiring so many bands, so many artists that I think, you know, that is why it was so special, because it was people doing things their own way. And I suppose that's ultimately what it comes down to. We've got to talk about our feelings of this and round it up with star rating. I enjoyed the nostalgia of it. Like I say, I'm a fan of that era. I'm a fan of what came afterwards. I thought it had a lot of interesting people in it. It moved along at a good pace. I was irritated by some of the people in it. I'm not going to mention names, but I thought that was quite fitting because that's what punk was about. Being irritated by things and by people. And politics.
I was just thinking about, before you say your rating, it just made me think about the idea of valuing. There was a moment where they were valuing items of memorabilia.
Yeah.
And for me, that felt entirely opposite to this idea, you know. Anyway, let's get those star ratings out because I want to know what you think.
I am giving Wake Up Punk a star rating of 3 stars.
I love a documentary. No lie. I love anything that has something about music, heritage and story, of which this is a component of that. And I enjoyed the fact that it generated a debate. You know, I watch a lot of music documentaries and I go, okay, I know a bit more about something. But this actually generated a debate. And, you know, we've talked about it in the pub, we're talking about it now. I don't think we may come to some conclusion and someone else might go, that's bullshit. Yeah. And I quite like that about it. So that the thing that I want to, the thing that would give me a higher rating is that. What I love is that it stimulated a conversation.
Yeah.
The documentary itself, I'd probably give it a solid 3 stars.
Yeah,
I agree with you. But I would almost take it to a 4 stars about what it did, how it made me think about this stuff. And now I think there's an ongoing debate, and I thought that was really interesting. And not a lot of documentaries do that. So I'm basically between a 3 and a 4 star. And I know you don't like that, Phil, because you like absolutes. So,
well, I do, but I might change my mind as well over the coming weeks because, like you say, it's generated a discussion, and I might actually start thinking about it
with you, and I'm sure I'm going to see you in the pub, and we're going to carry on having this conversation. And for that, it deserves something more, because the documentary itself is a bit, just basically it's an all right documentary.
Yeah.
But the topic is brilliant, and I think that's been surfaced through this, and I'm like into that. So am I 3? Am I 4? That's punk film. I'm neither 3 nor 4.
Absolutely. And I should say it's directed by Nigel Askew. And also there were loads of interesting elements. There was kind of like a dramatic Dickensian element to it as well. Because I think Malcolm McLaren at one point was called like a Fagin, wasn't he? He was like,
and those kind of set pieces within it were quite interesting.
Kids talking about politics.
It kind of
weird
in a way. It's kind of like the workhouse in the 1800s.
Yeah, and
loads of kids kind of plotting. So that was an interesting way of framing certain like set pieces of narrative. But yeah, there we go. I would say to people, watch it. And if you like punk, or you like punk music, should I say, I think you'll enjoy it. It is an interesting conversation about ownership and things and money and what something means after 40 plus years for people, and sentimentality, weirdly.
Yeah, definitely. So it's getting a UK and Ireland cinema release on the 9th of May. I think it's going to be available online pretty soon after. But all the details will be down below, as always. Check all the show notes. Check the links for where you can get Sean and send him some hate mail.
Send me some hate mail, it's very punk.
Put a poo in the post. Do people still do that? Probably.
Actually, Phil, we should have rated it in like poo icons. I'm between 3 and 4 poo icons.
The more poos, the better, which is a weird thing to say, really, isn't it? But yeah, we are Boys on Film. Don't forget to subscribe, like this video if you've enjoyed it. It's been a really heated debate today. Good to see you, Sean. Where can people find you, by the way, on social media? The links will be down there.
You can't, because I'm so punk, I've come off everything. So no. I am Sean Arella on all platforms, from LinkedIn to OnlyFans.
Brilliant. Oh God, that worries me. It doesn't surprise me, but it worries me.
Let's see if someone Googles that.
Thank you for watching, everyone. See you next time.